Hey guys, welcome back to my podcast in my room. It has been a minute, I know. I feel like it's always been a minute, but I took a little bit of time for myself to really think about what I wanted for my podcast for this new year, this new decade. And because I did that, I realized that I really did need that, because when I formed this podcast about a year ago, I knew I wanted a podcast and I knew more or less what I wanted to talk about. But if there was one thing that I just hadn't really figured out, was what kind of theme I wanted for my podcast and how I wanted to talk about the things that I would talk about on my podcast. And so recently, I haven't really been feeling the work that I've been putting out for my podcast. And not that that means that I didn't want to do a podcast anymore or that I didn't like my podcast anymore. It was more of a creative slump. I guess you could relate it to writer's block. And so I knew that I needed to take a step back and really envision what I wanted for my podcast. And so if you haven't noticed, I've created a new season for my podcast, and there's not going to be too many differences. I mean, there definitely are going to be changes and differences, but those changes and differences you may or may not notice. And I'm not going to explain those differences and changes because I want it to unveil in front of you guys on its own. I don't want to tell you guys. I kind of want it to just be figured out. And if you don't figure it out, it's not going to make a difference. But yeah, I took a step back and figured out what I really wanted the podcast to give off. I guess you could call it the vibe that it gives off. And so I'm really excited because this is something very different for me, and it's something I'm a little nervous about. I say nervous because it's definitely, I can't speak. It's going to be something that's out of my comfort zone, something that I'm literally just saying, you know what, fuck it, do it. But if I don't do it my way, I'm not gonna love my work. Because it hasn't felt like my work. It hasn't felt like me. And not saying that, it was done by other people and that's why it doesn't feel like mine. It's more like I was just doing things based on what I thought others would want to hear. And of course that's important, but I also want this podcast to be more, I want it to be, I don't want to say genuine, but I want it to be coming from really within me, if that makes sense. So if you don't really understand what I'm talking about, then that's completely okay. I know it's hard to understand a little bit because you're not really in my mindset, and that's why it's really hard for me to try to explain this to you in the best way, because there's no way we can both see it the same way, because it's my concept of my own podcast, of my own work. And I don't think anyone could relate unless, they have something that they create, whether it's art, music, whatever, and you know what it's like to look at your own work. So that's the best way I could put it. And if you don't have your own work, then I don't know how else to explain it to you. But just think about it that way. Your viewpoint, it's your viewpoint of your own work. And it could be for literally anything. So anyways, welcome to I want to say it's a fresh new start of the podcast, But at the same time, I'm still going to keep the previous episodes because those are my first podcast episodes, and I feel like, why am I going to delete them? Maybe in the future, I don't know. But for now, I'm going to take a turn in this whole podcast thing, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I mean, if you don't enjoy this new version of the podcast, then that's completely okay, because not everybody is going to like it. But if you do like it, then I appreciate that, and I'm very excited for what's to come. I'm very, very excited. Like, I have so much, now that I've given myself that creative freedom and letting go of the fear of judgment from other people, I'm so excited to bring what I have in mind and envisioned for this podcast to you guys. So I am changing my tune. That is the theme of this new season for the podcast. And by changing my tune, I mean that I am going to talk to you guys as if you're not there. I'm going to talk about things and talk about those things in a different way than I have before, if that makes sense. This is really hard to explain. That's why I say I don't want to explain what the change and differences are going to be for this podcast. I want it to unveil for itself, but the only thing that I will explain is that it's going to be about changing my tune. And so, with that being said, here is the first episode of the new season, and this episode is about the decade of history in the making. Now, I thought about this while also thinking about the, changing and creating the theme of my podcast. It's the beginning of a new year, and honestly, the start of a new year has always felt like just another day. And I mean, technically it is, but the start of a new year has never felt special or different to me throughout my whole life. I've never been fixated on starting a new year. Yes, it is a new year, literally, but I've never really been the type of person that's into resolutions or starting something fresh. I mean, of course, I still have resolutions and goals and stuff, but I don't do it based on it being a new year. So the new year has never been something special for me. But when I thought about it, I realized that it's the start of a new decade. And the start of a new decade does resonate with me. And what I mean by that is because I realized a lot of things in that quick moment of realizing that it was the start of a new decade. And so actually, technically, I just want to say this because when I read this article, it really tripped me out. And not in a bad way, not like it ruined anything, but it messed with my head a little bit because I read this article that said 2020 is not the start of a new decade, which when I read it, I realized that that's so true, but society has made 2020 a new decade, and that's okay. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but technically, literally, a decade ends with a 0 and begins with a 1. So, or I said that backwards. It begins with a 1 and ends with a 0. So technically, the end of 2020, December 31st, 2020, is actually the end of a decade. And January 1st, 2021 would be the start of a new decade. And it's been like this since 1999 to 2000, 2009 to 2010. It's been like this forever. But society makes it a new decade like a year earlier. And that's how it is with a lot of things. I mean, that's a whole separate podcast episode just talking about how society makes things cultural. And you might think that I don't make any sense and that what I'm saying is not correct, but it is. Trust me, like I know culturally and because of society, we make 2020, we made 2010, and we made 2000 a new decade when it wasn't. But you see, it messes with your head because it's right. Like 2020 is the end of a decade, not the start of a decade. But I don't care about it that much. We're going to say it's the start of a decade because technically there will be 10 years that will complete, and 10 years is a decade. So I just wanted to include that because it really messed with me a little bit. But anyways, so when I realized that it was a new decade, I realized that it was going to be the decade of my life beginning. And what I mean by that is this decade will be, I'll look back and it'll be the decade of history in the making. And this isn't for everybody, but I can say that I know a lot of people can relate to this because a lot of people are around my age who listen to my podcast. But if you're older, then it's kind of hard to relate to. But I've decided that for this decade, I will do things with intention because the things that I choose to do will affect my life and how it will be in the future. So with that being said, looking back to the past decade, right? In the last decade, I grew up. And although I'm still growing up, obviously, what I mean by growing up is I grew up from a child to a young adult. I went through those milestones in life, like graduating middle school, getting my period, starting high school, and meeting new friends, having my first kiss, graduating high school, just all those things that you go through while you're growing up from a child to a young adult, right? And so during the past decade, I learned things in order to be able to make life decisions later on in life. And that's really important to me. And I think it's just important in general because your upbringing does a lot for you in the way that you see life, okay? And for me, because of the things that I learned and the things that I went through in the past decade, in this decade, it'll be about me creating my own life. And so in this new decade, I will be growing from a young adult to a woman, and that is very empowering. I don't know how to I'm trying it's so hard because my thoughts are all over the place right now, even though I have my notes in front of me. But what I'm trying to say is at the end of the decade, I will be a woman. And where I will be, I don't know. But how I get to where I envision myself to be is all up to me right now throughout this decade. And so that is why I say all the decisions that I make will have an effect of what my life will be like. And that is why I mentioned everything that I am going to do will have intention, because now I'm not choosing what color am I going to wear for prom. I'm not choosing about what shoes I want to get for the new school year. I'm not making decisions based on a short-term lifespan. You know, it's no longer short-term decisions. It's now long-term decisions. And that's why it really sat deep with me when I realized that in the next decade, I will already have had my life going. And so I've made this decade the decade of history in the making for myself. So by the end of the decade, it'll be a surface level of what my life will be like, because obviously at least I hope so, my life will be long. I mean, not that I want to grow super old, if I'm being completely honest, but I hope that I will live past 30. And so by the end of the decade, my life will have been going, and I'll know what my life will be like already by the time that I'm 30. You know what I mean by that? I already have been on my own. I already have had my degree for years. I will already have been working for years. I will already have been settled into what is my own life. And I say that emphasized because right now I don't have my own life. I'm living and this is my life, but it's not my life because I'm not out on my own. I don't have my job yet. I'm doing the things that I have to do first, unfortunately, like college, and not being financially able to live on my own. So it's like I'm doing the things that I have to do first, but by the end of the decade, I will have already passed these things and starting my own life. And even by the time that I'm 30, although I will already have had like a good idea of what my life is like, I'll still have more of my life to take myself through. But this decade matters very much because everything that I do, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's just so important. And it's really what I'm trying to get across in this episode is that everything that you do in this decade will affect how your life is, because you're making long-term decisions. You're no longer making short-term decisions. You're not, for example, and this is just an example I can think of off the top of my head. When you date in high school, you're dating because, oh, the guy is cute. You know, you think he's cool. You're just dating for fun, right? But I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that they're dating for fun when they're out of high school. You know, most of the time, if you're with somebody after high school and it's nothing serious, it's really just messing around, you know, like you're literally just fuck buddies. But for somebody to be dating somebody after high school, it's because they're also thinking, I don't want to say they're like, oh, I'm dating this person because I'm going to marry them. But I'm saying that when you're out of high school, you tend to make decisions because you think of your future as well. And that's one of the best ways I could put it. And how I'm trying to explain myself. And that's just one example. You know, that's anything. Like, for example, internships, you know, you're not going to do an internship, you know, like in high school, you went on field trips. Oh, you were in clubs for fun and all these things that you did because you just wanted to try them out. But when you're out of high school, you're only going to do something because you see it benefiting you in the future, long-term wise. So I just hit my elbow against the desk. Sorry if you probably didn't hear that, but anyways, I asked myself, when I was thinking about all of this, I asked myself, where do I see myself in 20 years? I mean, in a decade. Not 20 years, in 10 years. In 10 years, in another decade. And I answered by predicting and just envisioning for myself. Obviously, anything can happen in life where things change, and that's really out of my hands. But I answered by saying that I see myself continuing to create things throughout my life. And that was my biggest thing, that I will continue to create things throughout my life, through my career, and through my personal life. I also talked about this podcast. I said that I see my podcast going places, being successful, because this podcast is definitely something that I think is very monumental in my life. I say monumental because it was one of the first things I ever did that was really outside of the box. Like, it was really out of my comfort zone, is how I should put it, actually. And I don't see this podcast going away anytime soon. In fact, it's something that I'm very passionate about and work hard towards, that I know it'll become successful because I'll make it successful. And so I then said that I'll have my career and that I will love my job doing whatever that I'm doing, whether it's the job that I see myself doing right now, or if it's another job that I never even thought that I would be doing. But I will love my job because I will only be doing what I love. And I'll have my brand, and by brand, I don't mean necessarily like a clothing brand or like a makeup brand. I don't mean a literal brand. I mean my brand as in my name, the brand that I have with my name. And with my brand, I'll have credibility and the connections through my career and through my work that I put out. And because of the work that I put out and the career that I have, it ties in together with my brand, right? So I see the end of the decade and going into the new decade will be the peak of my life. And not the only peak, but the peak where all of this envisioning and all of this, doing things with intention will pay off, because at the end, I'll be able to look back and think I was making history then. So that's how I answered that question, as in where I will see myself in a decade. And I also asked myself some questions. I asked, will I be married? Will I have kids? If I have kids, how many kids will I have? Where will I live? Where will I have traveled? And what projects will I have created? And I'm going to answer those questions right now, actually. I think it'd be kind of cool in a decade to look back and hear myself answer these questions, because who knows? But I think I will be married. By 30, I think I will be married. If I'm not married, obviously, I'll be doing fine. But I think I will. I think I will be married. Will I have kids? I don't think I will, honestly. If I do have kids, I think I'll only have one. And the reason why I say I don't think I'll have kids is because I'm the type of person that wants to do so much and wants to go to so many places that having kids is not a goal of mine. And I've realized that as I've grown up and actually been able to to think about where I see myself in the future. And so I don't think I'll have kids, although it's not up to me to know if I'm going to have kids in the future or not. So right now, I don't think I'll have kids. But if I do, I know that it's not going to be more than 2. If anything, it'll just be 1. And I think that I'll live in a city. I don't think I'll be living in the same small town that I grew up in, or just in any quiet town. I see myself definitely in the city, whether it's LA or New York. Those are the 2 that I can really see myself at. And I think I'll have traveled to lots of places. Maybe not everywhere, but I think that I will do the most traveling in my life during that time, especially with my career and the work that I put out, whether it's tied to my career specifically or like my own brand. And so as for what projects will I have created, that is something that I can't even answer, because I'm sure that there are going to be so many things that I create through this new decade that I don't even know that I'm going to create yet. But my whole brand is a project itself, and that's something that I will definitely have created by the end of the decade. And so I just think anyways, so I thought I would just answer those because, like I said, I think it would be so cool to listen to myself. I mean, if I even can. It's hard listening to yourself. I will say I have not gotten used to that. I mean, I listen to myself obviously because I have to, edit and make sure everything is good. But once I upload the podcast episode, I never listen to my episodes again. I don't know if anybody could even do that with themselves. Is there somebody who does that? Like, once I upload my videos, once I upload my podcast episodes, I cannot listen to I can't watch it or listen to it again. But anyways, this podcast episode isn't just for me though. Like, I know it sounds like it because of the way that I'm talking. It definitely sounds like I'm talking to myself more than you guys. But I want it to sound like that. I want it to sound like that because it wouldn't make sense if it just wouldn't. It wouldn't be what I want it to be if it sounded like I was talking to you guys specifically. But this podcast episode is my way of not just telling myself, but telling you guys as well that if you didn't realize any of the things that I realized myself, I hope that you would have realized it by now, listening to this episode. Because the point that I'm trying to get across is that you're beginning your own life in this new decade. This is your life, and nobody is going to do it for you. Nobody is going to put you where you want to be. Nobody is going to do that. It's up to you. And if you don't do it yourself, if you don't even try, all you're going to be doing in the next decade is wondering what would it have been like, or what would have happened if I did do that. You're just going to live in questioning what it might have been like if you took that direction or tried to do something that you wanted to do. And that is why I say just do it. I know that's Nike's slogan, and I don't know. I hate to say just do it, especially because it's like this slogan from Nike, which is like an athletic brand. And not that I have anything against athletic brands, but when somebody says just do it, it's like, I feel like it's better to say, I think anyways, it's better to say take that chance, because if you don't take that chance, you'll never know what might have happened if you took that chance. And although taking chances are scary, and trying new things are scary, and putting yourself out there is scary, it definitely is, trust me. If you've never put yourself out, I mean, even like giving a presentation to your class, that's putting yourself out there, and that is intimidating. So don't hold back. Do what you want to do. You want to make a YouTube channel? Do it. You want to make a podcast? Do it. You want to make music? Do it. You want to start you want to start a business? You want to start anything? Do it. But if there's one thing that I will repeat again, is that nobody's going to do it for you. It's all up to you. Okay? So don't expect somebody to come and help you make it big in music. Don't expect anybody to come and help you make it big in the model industry. Don't expect anybody to do anything for you, because it is your life. And if you want to get somewhere, you have to start by making history. And so, thanks. No, but anyways. No, but anyways, I'm, oh my gosh. But anyways, aside from becoming very motivating, you don't have to be a certain age. You don't have to be young right now to know that in the next decade you will be a different person. Everybody changes over time. It's not something that is not normal. I mean, you're going to tell me that you're the same person that you were in 2010? No, you weren't. You're not the same person that you were in 2010. I mean, there's just no way. And although this new decade might not be the beginning of your own life, it definitely will be the beginning of you becoming a different person. And so that is a way that you can relate it to yourself if you're not around my age. And even if you are around my age, this still like pertains to anybody and everybody. And with this new decade beginning, it's up to you what type of person you want to become and what type of life you want to have by the end of this decade. And that's really all my thoughts that I really had when I realized, oh my gosh, we're starting a new decade. And when I realized that we were starting a new decade, all of this just went straight to my head, like 100 miles per hour. And it's so hard to talk about it not because it's hard, not because it's difficult, but because it's hard to get that point of across and not knowing if you're making sense at all. Because obviously, you guys won't hear this until after I edit and upload it. And by that time, I mean, I'm having a conversation with myself right now. So I'm hoping that I make sense, but if I don't, I hope that at least you understood the main point of this whole episode. And this is just a glimpse of this new season, this new theme for my podcast. Again, you guys, like, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to scare everybody. I mean, I scare myself with my own thoughts. I overthink too much, and I think everybody thinks that they think too much, and everybody does think too much. But one thing that I think should be done is thinking about this new decade. I mean, seriously. So this is a shorter episode than, my usual ones. And that's just because I don't want to get off topic. I don't want to go another direction of what my main purpose was. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And I hope that you can take something away from it. I mean, whether it was the main point or not, I hope that you can take something away from this and use it towards your life. You don't have to remember me, but, maybe this made you think of something that you hadn't thought of, and I hope it does that. So, overall, I'm very excited for this new season, and I'm just very excited for all the things that I'm going to put out within this podcast and all the projects that I'm going to create in this decade. And now this is just the start of it for me. And yeah, I have nothing else to say, so I'm going to end this episode. And with everything being said, thanks for listening and tuning in, and I'll see you guys. Well, not see, but I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.